I am not the first ranger to lose their mind here. There is a mark missing from a rock above a mountain lake, and I am the one who didn't make it. I need you to understand that sentence, because it's the only thing I ever did that I'm proud of, and it's going to take me a long time to explain why. There are 9 or 12 scratches on that boulder. I've never been able to settle the count, and that uncertainty matters more than you'd think, each one a datum mark, a little scored line in the granite made by a ranger measuring the water. They go back 50 years. Each one was made by a man who was certain he was the first to really watch that lake. Each one was made by a man who was, by the time he made it, already beginning to disappear. Mine should be there right in the sequence, the 10th or the 13th. It isn't. I knelt at that rock in the gray August dawn with my knife in my hand and the whole weight of 19 years pulling my arm toward the stone. And I put the knife away, and I stood up, and I walked down the mountain, and I left a gap where I was supposed to be, a hole in the record, the one thing my kind of mind cannot file. That's the end of the story. I'm telling it to you first, out of order, on purpose, because I have come to hate suspense. I think of suspense as a kind of lie you tell about your own life, pretending you didn't already know how it would go. I knew how mine would go. I just couldn't see it while it was happening. Nobody can. That's the whole disease. And I'm going to try to show you exactly how it works. Because there is a man up on that mountain right now, this very summer, who has it too, and doesn't know. And I couldn't warn him. And this is the closest thing to a warning I have left. Let me tell you about the lake first. The thing you have to understand about the kettle is that it isn't a lake so much as a wound in the granite that happened to fill with water. It sits in a glacial cirque at the top of the Vale district, 7 miles up a road the county stopped maintaining in 1987. The last 2 of those miles you walk, because the switchbacks past the Dennard turnout are too tight and too rotten for anything wider than a person carrying a pack. I walked those 2 miles more times than I can count. I could tell you where each route crosses the trail. I could tell you the exact stone that rocks under your left boot at the 4th switchback, and the exact silence that comes after it stops rocking. I want you to hold on to that idea of silence. It's going to matter. It was the first thing I noticed up there and the last thing I understood. My name doesn't matter for this. I was the seasonal ranger at the Kettle Vale station, and before you picture something rustic and warm, let me correct you. The station was a prefabricated cabin trucked up in pieces in 1974, a green metal box with a stovepipe and a radio and a cot and a desk. It had the smell all such buildings get, pine tar and mouse and old coffee. And underneath all of that, something mineral. For years, I thought that mineral smell came from the water. I know now it came from us, from the people who stayed. I'll tell you what I mean by that before the end, I promise. But not yet, because the order is the only thing I still trust. I have learned to distrust almost everything else about my own account. My memory, my perceptions, the tidy way my mind wants to arrange cause and effect. But I kept a log, a real one, the county's carbon triplicate incident book, and I kept it the way my father taught me to keep the ledgers in his hardware store, obsessively, defensively, as though the book itself might one day be called to testify on my behalf. And it can. That's the awful part. The book is fine. The book is completely, boringly accurate. Everything I'm about to tell you is written in it, in my own hand, in my own dry official language, and none of it is impossible. That is exactly why I have not slept properly in 14 months. So let me start with the routine, because the routine is the thing that broke. And you can't feel a thing break unless you first understand how solid it was. A day at the kettle had a shape. I woke before light because the cold woke me. Even in July, the cirque holds the night's cold like a held breath. I lit the stove and I put the kettle on it. And yes, I was aware of the joke of it, the ranger at the kettle boiling his kettle. After the first summer, the joke stopped being funny and just became true, the way most things do. I logged the overnight low from the thermometer bolted to the north wall. I logged the lake level from the staff gauge, a graduated post driven into the shallows off the boat ramp, painted in 1/10 of a foot bands. Remember the staff gauge. That painted post is the second thing that mattered, and I nearly missed it. Then I walked the shoreline loop, 40 minutes if I didn't stop, an hour if I did. I checked the 3 backcountry campsites, the pit toilet, the bear box, the water quality station. I logged all of it. Visitors, if any. Weather, always. Wildlife of note. Anything out of the ordinary. I want to dwell on that walk because it was the spine of every day for 19 years, and because I've come to understand something about it. A route walked 10,000 times isn't one route. It's 10,000 routes, each one slightly different. And the difference between a man who stays sane in solitude and a man who does not may come down entirely to whether he can still perceive the difference. The loop went counterclockwise. I chose that direction my first season. For no reason I can reconstruct. And I never once changed it in 19 years. It's a small thing, the direction you walk a loop. But I've thought about it a great deal since. It's about how a life is made of small, unexamined choices that harden into law. Counterclockwise took me first along the north shore, where the pines came down almost to the water and the shade held the frost late into the morning. So the first 15 minutes of every day were spent in cold shadow, my breath showing, walking on a path of pine duff so old and compressed it had the give of carpet. Then the trail bent east and rose over a granite shoulder, and there always was the sun, hitting me full in the face as I came over the top. And for that one moment every morning, the whole cirque was laid out below me. The lake, the notch, the far talus slopes still blue with shadow. And I would stop. Every single morning. I would not log the stopping, because there was nothing to log. There was only a man on a rock in the sun, looking at a lake. Hold on to that image, too. The man who could still stop. Because there came a summer when he couldn't. When the loop had become a thing to complete rather than a thing to walk. And I did not notice the change. The not noticing was the whole disease. I should tell you how a man ends up at a place like the Kettle, because it doesn't happen by accident, whatever people imagine. There's a kind of person the wilderness services quietly rely on and never quite know what to do with the person who applies for the postings nobody else wants. The fire lookouts, the winter caretakerships, the one-man stations at the ends of roads the maps have started to forget. We are not, most of us, the rugged mountain men of the brochures. We are the ones with something we're trying to get away from, or something we're trying to hold on to, and the two turn out, in the end, to be the same thing. Though it takes years in the silence to learn that. The service takes us because we're cheap, and we don't complain, and we don't quit in July when the romance wears off because we didn't come for romance. We came for the absence of other people, and the absence of other people is exactly the thing the service can't find enough takers for. So they take us, and they don't look too hard at why we want it, and they tell each other, over the radio and at the district office, the stories about the ones who went strange, and they never connect the stories to the hiring, because to connect them would be to admit that the service has been sending a particular kind of wounded person, alone, into a particular kind of silence for 50 years, and calling the predictable result bad luck. I was one of those wounded people. I'm going to tell you what my wound was, plainly, rather than dole it out for suspense. Before the Kettle, I had a wife and a house in the valley, and a job doing inventory systems for a regional grocery distributor. By every external measure, I was fine. Internally, I was drowning by degrees, in a way I could not name, and therefore could not stop. I organized things. That was my comfort and my sickness. I alphabetized. I inventoried, I made systems, and when the systems couldn't hold when my wife got sick, when the treatments failed, when the house filled up with the terrible administrative debris of dying, the pill organizers and the appointment cards and the insurance letters I filed by date and subject as though the filing might slow the thing down, I discovered something. A system is only a way of not looking at the thing the system is built around, the center. I got very good at the periphery. I could tell you the copay for every appointment in her last year. I cannot tell you the last real thing she said to me, because I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at the calendar. I was managing, and she died while I was managing. After that, the valley was unbearable because it was full of things I had managed and none of them had worked. So I went up the mountain. I told everyone I needed a change, needed nature, needed to be away from the memories. That was all true in the sayable way and false in the deep way. The truth was that I imagined the compulsion needed the valley the way a fire needs fuel, and that up at the top of the world, with nothing to burn, it would simply go out. I had it exactly backwards. But I won't get ahead of the order. That's the shape of it, laid out plain. In the parts to come, I'm going to have to circle back and fill that shape in the wife, the house, the winters, the slow years. Because the erosion didn't happen in one season. It happened across all of them. And the final summer only completed a work that had been underway quietly for 19 years, and for a lifetime before that. But I wanted you to have the shape first. I wanted you to know where the water was going before I showed you the water. Her name was Elaine. I've said it now, and I want to keep saying it because the whole disease of my life has been the conversion of living things into categories, of Elaine into my wife, of a person into an entry. The only medicine I've found for it is the deliberate, effortful use of the actual name, the way you'd press on a wound to remind yourself it's still there. Elaine. She taught the 4th grade for 22 years at the elementary school on the east side of the valley, the one with the cottonwood that dropped its seed fluff every June, so thick it looked like snow on the playground. She came home most days smelling faintly of pencil shavings and the particular institutional soap they stocked in the school bathrooms. I did not know I had memorized that smell until years later at the kettle, when a hiker set down a pack that had the same soap in it, and I had to turn away and pretend to be looking at the water. She was, in every respect that turned out to matter, my opposite. And I married her, I think now, for exactly that, the way a man with a limp will lean toward the strong side. At the time, I'd have told you I married her because she was kind and quick and laughed easily and didn't seem to mind that I was quiet. All of that was true. But underneath it was a deeper thing, a thing I couldn't have named at 30 and can barely name now. She had a capacity I lacked entirely, a capacity for presence, for being in the room she was standing in, for looking at the person in front of her and seeing that particular person, not a representative of a category. Her whole vocation was that capacity. You cannot teach the 4th grade for 22 years and be any good at it, and she was very good at it without a genius for attention. A class of 39-year-olds is 30 distinct and urgent human beings, each one convinced correctly that they are the center of the universe. The teacher who survives is the one who can somehow hold all 30 centers at once, who can look at the child crying at the back of the room and know that this crying is not a category, is not disruption, is a specific grief with a specific cause that deserves a specific and immediate looking at. Elaine could do that. She did it all day, and then she came home and did it to me. And I did not know I was being seen. I only knew that being around her made me feel in some way I couldn't account for, less alone. I mistook the feeling for love, which it was, but I mistook it for a thing she was giving me rather than a skill I might have learned. So I took it for granted for 26 years, the way you take for granted the warmth of a fire you have never once tried to build yourself. I built systems. That was my genius, if you want to call it that, and it was a real one. I don't want to run it down. The world needs people who can see the pattern in the inventory, who can look at the chaos of 1,000 products flowing through a distribution center and design the system that makes them flow smoothly. I was good at that. I was paid well for it. I took a genuine and, I think, forgivable pride in it. My father had a hardware store, and he taught me the ledgers when I was 12. He taught me that a business lives or dies on whether you know exactly what you have and exactly what you owe. And he taught it to me with a moral weight, as though bookkeeping were a form of honesty, which it is. And I absorbed the moral weight along with the skill, so that keeping accurate records became for me not just a competence but a virtue, a way of being a good and responsible and trustworthy man. Do you see how the trap was built early? Do you see how the thing that would eventually erase me was installed in me as a virtue by a good man in a hardware store before I was old enough to shave? I've thought about my father a great deal. He was not a cold man, but he lived in the ledger too. And my mother, I think, felt about him something of what Elaine came to feel about me. I inherited the ledger from him, the way you inherit a house you did not choose. I moved into it without ever asking whether it was a place a person could actually live. Elaine tried to tell me. This is the part I have to force myself to say, because I understand now that she was not criticizing me. She was trying to save me. And I heard salvation as attack and defended myself against it for 26 years. She would say it gently, in the small moments. That's not the same as caring. The first time was about her mother. Her mother was declining out east, and I had, characteristically, sprung into action, which meant I had built a system. A spreadsheet of the mother's finances and medications, and the phone numbers of her doctors. A color-coded thing I was rather proud of. And I presented it to Elaine as an act of love. Look, I've organized everything. We have it all under control. Elaine looked at the spreadsheet for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and she said, "That's kind, and I want you to know it's kind. But it's not the same as caring." And then, seeing my face, she softened it. She said, I could use you to just sit with me tonight. Not do anything, just sit." And I did not understand. I genuinely did not understand what she was asking for, because sitting and not doing anything was not, in my vocabulary, a form of help. It was the absence of help. It was the thing you did when there was nothing useful to be done. And there was always something useful to be done. So I did the useful thing. I loved her, so I went and I called her mother's insurance company because I had noticed a billing error. And I fixed the billing error, and I came back and told her I'd fixed it, expecting to be thanked. And she was already asleep. Or pretending to be. I have thought about that night more than almost any other night of my life. The night she asked me to sit with her, and I fixed a billing error instead, and told myself it was love. She said it again over the years, in different words, at different times, and I built up a defense against it, a story about it. The story was that Elaine was the emotional one and I was the practical one, and that between us we made a balanced whole. She handled the feeling. I handled the logistics, and this was a good division of labor in a marriage. And there's a version of that story that's true and healthy, and I want to be fair to us. We did have some of that. There were years that were genuinely good. Real laughter, real ease, real partnership. But the story was also a wall, and I built the wall a little higher every time she tried to tell me the truth. Until near the end, the wall was so high that when the truth finally came for us in a form that could not be logistically managed, I had no way over it. I had spent 26 years making sure of that. The diagnosis came in the spring. I remember the season with a precision that shames me because I remember everything as a data point. Spring. The cottonwood not yet dropping its fluff. And I remember it because I've gone over that spring so many times looking for the moment I could have chosen differently. The terrible answer is that there was no single moment. There was only the accumulated weight of a lifetime of small wrong choices, so that when the large choice came, I made it the way I'd made all the small ones, automatically, out of the deep groove I had worn in myself. And the large choice was this. Faced with the fact that my wife was going to die, I built a system. I built a magnificent system. I'm not being ironic. As a system, it was genuinely excellent, and I received a great deal of praise for it in the months that followed. From the oncology social worker, from Elaine's sister, from the friends who came by. Everyone marveled at how organized we were, how on top of it, how well I was handling things. And I drank that praise like water because it confirmed that I was doing the right thing, that love looked like this, like a color-coded binder with tabs for each specialist. A wall calendar cross-referenced against a medication schedule, cross-referenced against the insurance authorizations. All of it maintained in my small, precise hand, updated nightly, defended against error with the full force of the only skill I had ever really had. And every hour I spent on that binder, and I spent hundreds of hours on that binder, was an hour I spent with my back to Elaine. Literally, sometimes. I would sit at the kitchen table with the binder open under the good lamp, and she would be on the couch behind me in the room, dying by degrees. And I would be facing the wall, facing the calendar, managing, and I would feel, doing it, a deep sense of rightness, a sense that I was fighting for her, that every authorization I secured, every appointment I optimized, was a blow struck against the thing that was taking her, and none of it, not 1 hour of it, was a blow struck against anything. It was all periphery. It was all the water glass on the nightstand. And the center, the actual dying woman, in the actual room, I could not turn around and face. Because I had never in my life learned how. And now there was no time to learn. I want to tell you about the last weeks, because it's in the last weeks that the shape of my whole failure became clear, though I couldn't see it then. I can only see it now, and the seeing is the thing I carry. Near the end, the system ran out of things to do. This is what no one tells you about managing a dying person. Eventually, there is nothing left to manage. The treatments stop because they're no longer treatments. They're only suffering with a schedule. The appointments dwindle. The insurance authorizations become moot. And the binder, my magnificent binder, my fortress, my proof of love, became suddenly and horribly empty. A book about a war that was over. I would open it at the kitchen table out of habit and find nothing to update. And I did not know what to do with my hands. I did not know what to do with myself. I had built my entire relationship to her illness, and by extension, in those final weeks, my entire relationship to her around the activity of management. And when the management ended, I discovered I had no other way of being in a room with her. I had, over 26 years, let every other way atrophy. So I sat by her bed in those last days, and I straightened things. That was what was left to me. I aligned the water glass and the tissue box and the little bell she was too weak to ring. I squared the corner of the blanket. I organized the pill bottle she no longer took. I brought order to the surface of her dying, because I could not bear and had never learned to bear the center of it. And she watched me do it. That's the thing. She was still there, still herself, thinned and slowed, but present, present to the very end, in the way she had always been present. And she watched me straighten the objects on her nightstand with a look on her face that I could not read at the time, and that I've spent the years since decoding. And I think now, I cannot be sure, I will never be sure, that is my sentence. I think now that it was not anger, and it was not disappointment. I think it was tenderness. I think she looked at me straightening the water glass, and she understood, better than I did, that this was the only language of love I had. That this squaring of corners was the fullest expression of devotion I was capable of. That I was, in my crippled way, loving her as hard as I could with the only muscles I had ever developed. And I think she forgave me for it right there, in real time, while I was doing the very thing that needed forgiving. The reason I think this is that once, near the very end, when I had just finished aligning the glass, she reached out one thin hand and put it over mine. And she stopped me, held my hand still on the nightstand. And she said, "You can just be here, you know. You don't have to do anything. Just be here." It was the same thing she had said the night of her mother's spreadsheet. The same thing she had been saying our whole life together. And this time, this one time, the only time I heard it, I did not understand it. Not fully. Understanding came later. But I heard it, and I stopped straightening, and I sat, and I held her hand, and I looked at her face, and I did not do anything. I just was there. For I don't know how long, an hour maybe. The longest and hardest and truest hour of my life. And then a nurse came, or the phone rang, or some errand offered itself, and I fled, back into doing, back into the periphery, back into the ledger. I do not remember ever having that hour again. There may not have been time. She died 11 days later, and I do not know, I truly do not know whether I was looking at her when she went, or whether I was, as I had been for 26 years, facing the wall. That is what I brought up the mountain. I need you to understand that. When I get, in the parts to come, to the still lake and the held silence and the small liquid sound I heard as permission, this is the thing that was standing behind me the whole time. This is the center I had spent my whole life not facing. The kettle did not put it there. The kettle only took away every other person and every distraction and every billing error, until at last there was nothing left to manage but water and weather and a book. Nothing left to face but the thing I had always been fleeing. And I found, at the top of the world, in the perfect silence, a way to flee it even there. That is the horror of this story, if it has one. Not that something came for me at the lake, but that I brought the thing that would take me, carried it up the trail on my own back, past the boulder, into the green metal box, and set it down, and lived with it, and called the living peace. After she died, the valley became unlivable in a way I could not have predicted and did not at first understand. I had expected grief. I had prepared for grief. In my fashion, I had even, God help me, made a kind of system for it. I read the pamphlets about the stages. I cleared her things in an orderly way. I returned to work on the schedule the company suggested. What I had not prepared for was that the house would be full of my failure. Every room held some object I had managed instead of loving. The kitchen table where I had faced the wall, the nightstand where I had straightened the glass, the binder which I could not throw away and could not open, sitting on a shelf like a headstone. I would come home from work to that house, and I would stand in the hall, and I could not go in, because going in meant being surrounded by the evidence. All the small, honest testimony of a man who had spent his one chance at love on the periphery, and there was no system that could organize that away, no binder that could file it. I discovered for the first time in my life that there was a kind of pain management could not touch, and it was the only real pain there is. And it had been waiting for me my whole life, on the far side of the wall I'd built to keep it out. So I applied for the loneliest posting in the district. I told myself and told the interviewer and told Elaine's sister when she asked that I needed a change, that I needed to be in nature, that the valley held too many memories, all of which was true in the acceptable, sayable way and false in the deep way. Because the truth was that I wasn't fleeing the memories, I was fleeing the evidence. I was going somewhere that held no testimony of my failure, no rooms where I had faced the wall, no objects I had straightened instead of loving. And I imagined, in my ignorance, that in a place with nothing to manage, I would finally be free of the compulsion to manage, that the disease needed the valley the way a fire needs fuel, and that up at the top of the world, with nothing to burn, it would simply go out. I had it exactly backwards. That's the thing I understand now and didn't understand then. The thing this whole long testimony is trying to say. The compulsion did not need the valley. The compulsion was in me. And a compulsion with nothing legitimate to feed on does not starve. It turns to whatever is at hand. It will manage the weather if there's nothing else. It will build a magnificent, obsessive, loving system around the level of a lake. And it will face that wall with exactly the devotion it once faced the kitchen wall. And it will call the facing peace. And there will be no wife left to reach out one thin hand and stop it. No one to say you can just be here. You don't have to do anything, just be here. No one at all. Only the water, only the held silence. Only that mineral smell in the green metal box that I told you, at the very beginning, came not from the lake, but from us, from the people who stayed. I'll tell you exactly what I mean by that before this is over, but not yet. I promise to keep the order, and the order is the only thing I still trust. The first summers at the kettle were good. I have to be honest about that, because the temptation telling a story like this is to make the whole thing a descent, to have the shadow fall across the very first page. And it did not happen that way. Pretending it did would be its own kind of lie. The lie of a man arranging his past into a tidy causal sequence, which is exactly the disease I'm trying to confess. The truth is messier and worse. The truth is that for years, the kettle was the best thing that ever happened to me, and that the very qualities that made it good were the qualities that would, in the end, take me. And I could not have known that. Neither could any of the 9 or 12 before me. Because from the inside, the medicine and the poison were the same substance, taken at the same dose, and only the years told which it was. That first June, I walked in over the rotten snow with a pack that weighed more than I could really carry and no idea what I was doing. The district had given me a 2-day orientation from a man named Halloran, who had run the lower stations for 30 years. He walked me around the kettle loop once, pointing things out: the gauge, the bear box, the sampling station, the radio protocol. And at the end, standing at the boat ramp looking out at the half-frozen lake, he said a thing I did not understand then, and understand completely now. He said, "The ones who do well up here are the ones who can be bored." And I said something back, something eager, about how I didn't expect to be bored. There was so much to observe and record. And he looked at me for a second, the way Elaine used to look at me, the flicker of someone registering a thing slightly off. And he said, "That's not what I mean." And he didn't explain. And he went down the trail, and it took me 19 years to learn what he meant. By then, it was almost too late. What he meant, I think, was this: there are 2 ways to survive a great deal of solitude, and they look identical from the outside and are opposite from the inside. The first way is to be genuinely bored, to let the emptiness be empty, to sit on the granite shoulder in the morning sun and look at the lake and have nothing happen in your mind. No observing, no recording, no meaning-making. Just a man and a lake and the sun. An animal at rest in its place. And this is the way that heals, because it teaches you that you do not have to fill the silence. That the silence is not a problem to be solved. That the world does not require your management to continue existing. The second way is to fill the emptiness with activity, with observation and record-keeping and system and routine. To be so busy attending to the place that you are never actually in it. And this way does not heal. This way is the disease wearing the mask of diligence. And it is the way the wilderness services select for, without meaning to. Because the diligent ranger keeps a beautiful book and gets a good performance review and comes back year after year, and the bored ranger, the healed one, often does not come back because he got what he needed and moved on. So over 50 years, the postings fill by a slow, invisible sorting with exactly the people least able to survive them. The diligent, the systematic, the ones who cannot be bored, the ones like me. But that first summer, I could still be bored. A little. I want to give myself that. I remember afternoons that first year, before the routine had hardened, when a thunderstorm would come through and pin me in the cabin, and I would lie on the cot and listen to the rain on the metal roof and think about nothing. Actually, nothing. And it was the first peace I had known since before Elaine got sick. I remember thinking, with a kind of wonder, that maybe I was going to be all right. That the mountain was doing what I'd hoped. That the compulsion was quieting. And it was quieting. That's the cruel part. In the early years, it did quiet because there was so much genuine novelty. So much actual world pressing in that there was no room for the compulsion to build its castles. Every day brought real events. A new species of bird. A weather pattern I hadn't seen. A route around the far shore I hadn't tried. My attention was full of the actual place, and a mind full of the actual place has no room to substitute its records for the world, because the world keeps interrupting. The disease needs a vacuum, and a new place to a new inhabitant is not a vacuum. It is overflowing. It is only later, when the novelty is exhausted, when there's no bird you haven't seen, and no route you haven't walked, and no weather that surprises you, that the vacuum opens, and the compulsion, which never left, which only waited, moves in. I did not marry again. There were opportunities in a small way in the winters down in the valley. A woman named Carol, who worked at the hardware store where I got seasonal work. The irony of the hardware store did not escape me. I had ended up in my father's world after all. Carol was kind, and we had dinner a few times, and she made it clear she was open to more. And I could not do it. I could not go through the door, because I knew, without being able to say it, that I would do to Carol what I had done to Elaine. That I would build a system and face a wall. And I had loved Elaine at least, whatever my failures. It seemed a worse crime to do the same thing to someone I did not love. To make Carol into an entry in a life I could not actually be present for. So I did not marry again. And I told myself it was fidelity to Elaine's memory. And it was really fear. And it was really, underneath the fear, a kind of honesty, the one honest thing I did in those years. The recognition that I was not fit for the center of another person's life, because I did not know how to stand in the center of my own. The years went by. I want to compress them because they compressed themselves. That's the nature of a routine. It eats time. A life of perfect routine is a life with almost nothing to remember. When I try to recall the middle years, the 7th, the 10th, the 13th summer, they blur together into a single composite summer. One long, identical June to October. The ice going out, the melt, the flowers, the hikers, the gold light, the closing. This blurring frightened me the first time I noticed it, and it frightens me more now that I understand it. Because it is the first symptom, the very first, the one that comes years before the lake holds still. When your days stop being distinct, when they merge into one repeated day, it is not because the days are actually identical. No 2 days at a mountain lake are ever actually identical. The light is always different. The water is always different. The mind that is truly present will always find the difference. It is because you have stopped perceiving the difference. You have started living in your record of the day rather than the day. And the record is a template. And the template repeats. And so your memory repeats. And years of your one and only life collapse into a single composite that you will never get back. That you did not actually live. That you spent instead in the ledger. I can date the beginning of the true decline, I think, to the 12th or 13th summer, though I couldn't have dated it at the time. And I date it not by any dramatic event, but by the disappearance of a small habit. I had, for the first dozen years, kept a second book. Not the official incident log, the county's triplicate book, a private one. A plain notebook I bought each spring, in which I wrote, in the evenings, not observations but thoughts. Whatever came. Sometimes about Elaine, sometimes about the day, sometimes just a description of the light on the water that had no purpose, that was not data, that I would never need to refer to, that existed only because the writing of it was a way of being with the day, of honoring it, of saying to the day, you happened, you were real, I saw you. It was, I understand now, the healthiest thing I did, the one place where I looked at the center instead of the periphery, the exact opposite of the incident log. The incident log was the disease, and the private notebook was the medicine. And for a dozen years, I kept both. And somewhere around the 12th or 13th summer, I stopped keeping the notebook. I did not decide to stop. There was no last entry, no ceremony. I simply, one spring, did not buy the notebook, and did not notice that I had not bought it. And the evenings that had been spent writing about the light were spent instead on the incident log, cross-checking my readings, tidying my records, extending the reach of the system. The medicine stopped, and the disease continued, and no one, least of all me, was there to notice the difference. When I found this past year that I could not remember the middle summers, it was because in the middle summers I had stopped writing the book that would have let me remember them. I had traded the book of presence for the book of management. And the book of management, it kept for its own sake, is a machine for forgetting your life while appearing to record it. Now I have to tell you about the winters. I have been avoiding them, and I notice that I'm avoiding them, which is how I know they matter. Most seasonal rangers never winter at the kettle. The station closes in October, and there's no reason for anyone to be up there in the dark months when the road is buried and the lake is locked under ice and the temperatures at that altitude go to places that kill. But twice in my 19 years, the district needed a winter caretaker. Once for a research project, a set of instruments that had to be tended, their data collected. And once, years later, simply because the budget allowed it and I asked. The second time I said yes for reasons I am ashamed of, and I'll come to them. But the first time, I said yes because it was work, and I needed work, and because some part of me, the honest, fearful part, wanted to know what the place was when everyone was gone, when even the possibility of a hiker was removed, when the solitude was total and sealed and lasted not for a season, but for the whole long dark. I'll tell you what a winter at the kettle actually is in the next part, because you cannot understand what it did to me unless you can feel it. And I'll tell you about the first winter, which nearly did me good, and the second winter, which I asked for, and which is the thing I'm most ashamed of in this entire account. I want you to understand what winter at the kettle actually is, because it is not the winter of a valley. It is not the winter of a town, where the snow falls and the plows come and life continues indoors. Winter at the kettle is a cessation. By December, the road is gone, not snowed over, gone, erased. The only way in or out is on skis, over terrain that will kill you if the weather turns, and the weather turns without warning. So for weeks at a time, there is no way in or out at all. You're as isolated as a man on the moon, more isolated. An astronaut has mission control, has voices. I had a radio that worked when the weather allowed and did not when it didn't. A supply of food and fuel that had to last. And the lake frozen now, locked under 2 feet of ice and then buried under the snow, so that it was not even a lake anymore, not even a surface, just a white field, indistinguishable from the meadow. The whole cirque reduced to a single white bowl, under a sky that in the clear cold nights held more stars than I had known existed, and in the storms held nothing at all. A white roar, a world erased down to the 4 metal walls of the cabin and the ticking of the stove, and the sound always the sound of my own breathing. In the deep silence of a winter night at 11,000 feet, your breathing becomes a sound you cannot stop hearing. A sound that will, if you let it, become the whole of your attention. In and out, in and out. The only moving thing in a frozen world. That first winter, I nearly did well. I mean that in Halloran's sense. I was frightened enough, that first winter new to it, unsure I would survive it, that I could not fall into routine. Because there was no routine yet. Every day was a real problem. Keep the fire. Keep the water, keep the body warm, keep the instruments running, get to the radio when the window opened. And a mind occupied with real survival is a mind too busy to build castles. So that first winter, terrible as it was in a strange way clean. It was the last clean season I would have. I came out of it in April, when the road began to open, thinner and shaken and changed. I remember standing at the Dennard turnout, looking down at the valley where the spring had already started, the green coming up the lower slopes, and feeling that I had touched something real, that the winter had scoured me down to something true. And I think, if I had stopped, then if I had never gone back, I might have carried that scoured clean feeling down into a different life. But I went back. Of course, I went back. The summer came and I went up, and the routine was waiting. The beautiful, deadly routine. And it closed over me like water over a stone. And the clean thing the winter had given me dissolved in it within a month. And I did not even notice it dissolving, because by then I had stopped keeping the book that would have let me notice. The second winter came in the 16th year, and I asked for it. That is the thing I am ashamed of, and I have circled it long enough. The first winter had been assigned to me. I said yes to work I was offered. The second winter, I sought out. I heard at the district office in the fall that the budget would allow a caretaker again, and that no one had been found. And I went in, and I volunteered. And the man behind the desk, not Halloran. Halloran was retired by then. A younger man who did not know me well looked at my record of 2 decades of clean seasons and said, "Well, if anyone can handle it." And I took that as a compliment. And it was not a compliment. It was the sound of the sorting machine placing exactly the wrong man into exactly the wrong place. And I did not hear it that way, because by the 16th year I could not hear much of anything that did not confirm the routine. Why did I ask for it? I have made myself sit with this question because the answer is the whole diagnosis. I told myself and told the younger man that I wanted the winter work for practical reasons, the money, the continuity, that I had done it before and knew what I was doing, all of which was true and none of which was the reason. The reason was that I could no longer bear the valley, not the way I couldn't bear it right after Elaine died. That was grief. This was worse. This was that the valley had become, over 16 years, a place too full of other people and their motion and their change. A place where things happened, where Carol had married someone else and had grandchildren now, and would nod at me in the hardware store with a kindness that felt like an accusation, where the seasons turned and people aged and babies were born and a whole living human world went on churning and shifting and refusing to hold still. I could not stand it anymore. I could not stand a world that moved. And up at the kettle in the winter, the world did not move. That was what I wanted. I wanted the world to stop. And I knew, without letting myself know it, that the one place on earth where the world stopped was the frozen Circoy in the dark months. So I volunteered to go and live inside a stopped world. And I called it practical. And the man behind the desk called it capable. And it was neither. It was a sick man walking open-eyed and unaware toward the exact conditions of his own undoing. The second winter, I did not do well. There was no fear to keep me clean this time, because I knew the winter now. I had survived it once, and the survival had become a competence, and the competence had become a routine, and the routine up there in the total dark and the total silence had nothing to interrupt it, nothing at all. The first winter, every day had been a real problem. The second winter, every day was a procedure. I had a system for the fire and a system for the water and a system for the radio window and a system for the instruments. And the systems ran themselves, and I ran them. And there was nothing left over. No novelty, no emergency, no other human being, no bird I hadn't seen, because there were no birds, no route I hadn't walked, because there was nowhere to walk. Only the white bowl, and the four metal walls, and the stove, and my breathing. And into that perfect vacuum, the compulsion moved and made itself completely at home. I began that second winter to keep records of things that did not need recording. This is the symptom I want you to see clearly, because it is the one that, in retrospect, I can point to and say, there, that is a mind coming apart. And it did not look like coming apart. It looked like diligence. It looked like a careful man being careful. I began to log my own body. I took my pulse each morning and recorded it. I recorded my weight, my sleep, the number of breaths per minute I counted lying on the cot. I recorded the exact time I lit the fire and the exact time it burned down, and the temperature of the cabin at fixed intervals throughout the day, plotting it, looking for patterns. And I told myself this was reasonable. A caretaker alone in a killing cold should monitor his own condition. And there's a version of that which is reasonable. But I was not doing the reasonable version. I was doing the compulsive version. I was converting myself into an inventory. I was doing to my own body and my own days exactly what I had done to Elaine's dying. Managing the surface of a thing because I could not face its center. And the center, that winter, alone in the stopped world, was a question I had never once in my life let myself ask, which was, what have I done? And who have I become? And is this frozen solitude I sought out on purpose, is this a life at all? Or is it only a very slow and very orderly way of not being alive? I could not ask that question, so I logged my pulse instead. And the lake. I have to tell you about the lake that winter because it is the first time the lake did the thing. Or rather, the first time I did the thing to the lake, 16 years before the final summer. And I did not recognize it. And if I had recognized it then, the whole rest of my life might have gone differently. Under the winter snow, the lake was invisible, just part of the white bowl. But I knew where it was, and I took, as part of my instrument tending, a set of measurements out on the ice. Through a hole I kept open with great labor measuring the ice thickness and the water temperature beneath it for the research data. and I recorded these measurements, and 1 week in the deep heart of that winter in January, in the killing cold, I recorded the same water temperature 4 days running, exactly the same, to the 10th of a degree, and I felt it. I remember it now. I did not understand it then. I felt the warmth, the same warmth I would feel 16 years later at the boulder, the deep, dangerous relief of a system confirmed, of a number that held, of something in the moving world that had finally stopped. Now under the ice, in the dead of winter, the water temperature at depth is genuinely near constant. That is real physics. That is not the disease. But my response to it was the disease. My response was to love it, to want it, to feel that the constant number was a kind of promise. I remember lying on the cot that night and thinking, with something like happiness, everything is still now. Everything is finally still. That is the exact thought, word for word, the exact feeling that would take me 16 years later. And it was already there, already fully formed, in the 16th winter. And I logged my pulse, and I did not see it, because the mind cannot see the thing it is doing while it is doing it. The mind can only see it later, from the far side, if it is lucky enough to have a far side. And most of the 9 or 12 did not. I came out of the second winter in April, and I was not scoured clean the way I had been after the first. I was, if anything, deeper in. I had spent 5 months in a stopped world, learning to love the stillness. And I came down to the valley in the spring. And the valley's motion, which had driven me up the mountain in the first place, was now not just unbearable, but actively wrong to me. Offensive. Like noise to a man with a headache. And I remember thinking, that April, standing at the Dennard turnout, looking down at the green coming up the slopes, the exact reverse of what I had thought after the first winter. After the first winter, I had thought, I have touched something real, and I could carry it down into a different life. After the second winter, I thought, I have found the only place where I can bear to be. And I cannot wait for the summer to end, so I can go back to the winter. I wanted the stillness. I had acquired a taste for the stopped world, the way a man acquires a taste for a poison. Gradually, pleasurably, fatally. And from the 16th winter on, every summer was only a corridor I walked through to reach the next winter. Except I did not get another winter, as it turned out. The budget never allowed it again. And so I was left for the last 3 summers, wanting a stillness I could not have. Hungry for it. And that hunger is what made the final summer's held lake so irresistible. Because it offered in July, in the middle of the loud living season, the stillness I had been starving for since January of the 16th year. The last 3 summers I want to pass over quickly. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing happened. And the nothing was the whole of it. The routine had fully closed. I no longer stopped on the granite shoulder in the sun. I told you that already at the beginning, but I want to place it now in its true time. It was the last 3 summers, the 17th, the 18th, the 19th, that I stopped stopping. That the loop became a thing to complete rather than a thing to walk. And I did not notice, and there was no one to notice for me. And the days merged into the composite day, and the composite day repeated, and the years drained away like the lake in August, invisibly, naturally, while I watched the number instead of the water. I did have hikers those last summers, and I want to tell you one thing about the hikers because it is a symptom too, and it is a painful one. In the early years, I had liked the hikers, the 3 or 4 minutes of another human being, exactly the dose I could handle. By the last summers, I did not like them. They disturbed the stillness. They came over the pass talking and laughing, and they skipped stones on my water, and they asked their questions and wanted me to be proud at them. And I performed the pride. I stamped their books and pointed out the dipper working the shallows. I was, I am sure, entirely normal to them, a friendly, competent ranger. And inside, I was waiting for them to leave, resenting the rings their voices made in the silence. And when they went down the trail, I felt the relief, the terrible relief. The relief of a man who wants to be left alone with the thing that is killing him. And once the 18th summer, a family came up. A young couple with a small child, a girl of maybe 6. And the girl was delighted by everything. By the lake, by the pikas in the talus, by me, by my green metal box. She asked me 100 questions, in the way small children do, each one urgent, each one assuming she was the center of the universe, which she was. And I answered them, and I was patient, and the parents thanked me. But the whole time, some part of me was standing back, appalled. Because the girl's delight, her total, unguarded, present tense aliveness, was so exactly the thing I had lost, was so exactly what Elaine had had and had tried to give me. That being near it was a kind of pain. And I was glad, God forgive me. I was glad when they left, glad to have the silence back. I stood at the boat ramp and watched that radiant living child walk away down the trail toward the world that moves, and I turned back to my still water with relief. If you want to know the exact measure of how far gone I was by the 18th summer, that is it. That is the measure. That I preferred the still water to the living child. That I chose the stopped world over the moving one every single time it was offered, and called the choosing peace. The 19th summer was the last, and it is the summer the lake held, and I have kept the order well enough now. You have the whole man, the father's ledger, the failed marriage, the straightened water glass, the abandoned notebook, the 2 winters, the acquired taste for the stopped world, the child I was glad to see leave. You have everything I brought up the trail on my back that final June, and now I can tell you how it finished. The 19th summer opened like all the others. I want to say that plainly because the horror of it is that there was no omen. The ice went out in June with its groaning and singing across the water at night. The melt ran. The flowers made their frantic 6-week life. I walked in over the last patches of rotten snow and settled into the green metal box and lit the stove and put the kettle on. And if you had watched me those first weeks, you would have seen a competent, solitary man doing a job he had done for 19 years. And you would have seen nothing wrong, because there was nothing yet to see. The wrongness was not in the mountain. The wrongness was in me, and had been in me for years, and was only waiting, the way the compulsion always waited for the vacuum to open. And the vacuum opened in the 3rd week of June. I noticed the level had held for 6 days. That was all. The staff gauge read the same morning after morning, 1/10 of a foot for 1/10 of a foot. And I felt the relief, the warmth in the chest. And I got rigorous. I found a small flat boulder above the waterline near the boat ramp, and I scratched my datum mark into the granite with the tip of my knife, a clean vertical line, right at the level of the water's edge. So I would have a fixed reference the gauge couldn't drift from. And I began to measure. 11 days. The level did not move. I ran the tape 3 times each morning and averaged the readings. And each morning the average agreed with the morning before. And each morning the warmth spread through my chest a little wider, a little deeper. And I want to put you inside those mornings because it did not feel like a descent. It felt like the best summer in years. It felt like coming home. I would wake in the cold dark earlier and earlier as the summer went on. 3:30, 3. Waking not from cold now, but from eagerness, from the pull toward the boulder. I would dress in the dark and take the tape and the flashlight and the little waterproof notebook, and I would go down to the water's edge before there was any light at all, and I would kneel on the granite, and the lake would be there, black and invisible in the dark, and I would run the tape down and put the flashlight beam on the number and read it, and it would be the same, and I would feel the warmth, and I would kneel there a while longer in the dark by the black, unmoving water, not measuring anymore, just kneeling, just being near it. It was, I understand now, the closest thing to prayer I have ever done, and it was prayer to the wrong God. It was worship of a stillness that did not exist, and I knelt at that altar every dark morning of July and rose from it warm, and went back to the cabin to log the reading and start the day. And I was happy as I had been since before Elaine got sick. And the happiness was the disease at its fullest flower. The disease having finally found, after a lifetime, an object it could love without interruption. A thing that would never change and never leave and never die. A lake that held. And then the silence changed. I have to be careful here because this is where a man telling a story like this reaches for the ghost. And there was no ghost. What happened was this. As July went on, the silence at the lake stopped being the ordinary silence of a quiet place. It acquired a floor, a quality of being produced. I would kneel by the water in the dark, and it was not merely that there was no sound. It was that the absence itself seemed to have a texture, a weight, a downward pressure, as though the silence were leaning in toward me, as though it were listening. And I began to talk to it. Not much, a few words. The small, true things I had never said to anyone. I would kneel by the black water and say them out loud, and the silence would lean in and take them, and it felt I cannot describe it any other way. It felt like being heard. For the first time since Elaine. And one night near the end of July, I knelt there and I said out loud into the dark, "I don't think I want to leave." And the deepest silence of my life answered. And then from the black water, there came a small liquid sound, a soft single plink, the sound a stone makes, or a rising fish, or a bubble of gas working up through the mud. And I heard it as the lake saying, yes. I know now what that sound was, and it does not matter what it was. A fish, a seep, a pocket of air. It was a real, physical, meaningless sound. And what heard it as yes was not the lake. It was my own starved longing for permission. Permission to stop. Permission to stay in the stopped world forever. Permission to finally lay down the unbearable work of being a person in a world that moves. There was no one left to reach out a thin hand and stop me. No one to say, you can just be here. You don't have to do anything. Just be here. So I said it to myself, through the water. I met myself in the dark, and I mistook the meeting for a visitation, and I logged it. I wrote in the incident book, possible seep activity near shore, and I slept like a child. And I think that was the night I was truly gone. I would go on functioning for 6 more weeks, logging, walking the loop, the building with the lights on and everyone left. Those 6 weeks I remember almost nothing of, and the nothing is itself the record. I know from the log what I did. The log is complete and boring and accurate. Weather, level, wildlife, a hiker on the 12th, a thunderstorm on the 19th. But I do not remember doing any of it. I have only the log's word that I was there. This is the thing I need you to understand about how a mind goes at a place like the Kettle. It does not go in a blaze. It does not rave. It goes quietly. It goes by contracting, by drawing in tighter and tighter around the one still point, until everything outside that point stops registering, and the man keeps functioning, keeps logging, keeps walking the loop. But he is not there. He has moved his whole self down to the boulder in the dark. And the summer happens around a body that performs the routine, while the mind kneels hour after hour, day after day, at the altar of the unmoving water. That is what the last man before me was doing, I think. The one who walked out in October and left the stove going. He was not mad in the raving way. He was calmer than he had ever been. He had contracted down to the one still point so completely that the rest of the world, including the fact that it was October and the season was over, and he was supposed to close the station and go down, simply stopped registering. And one morning, he walked out of the cabin toward the water and never turned back. Left the stove going because the stove belonged to the world he had already left. I do not know what became of him. No one does. But I know exactly what he felt. Because I felt it. I felt the pull to walk toward the water and not turn back. The only thing that saved me, the only thing, was the boulder. It was the 2nd week of August. I have the date, the log has the date. But I did not need the log for this one. This one I remember. I went down to the boulder in the dark as I had every morning, and I knelt, and I ran the tape, and the flashlight beam fell not on my data mark, but a little to the side of it. My hand had slipped in the dark, or my knee had shifted. Some small accident. And in the beam, next to my scratched line, I saw another mark, older, weathered, and I moved the beam, and there was another, and another, a column of them going up the granite. Faint, some nearly gone, and I knelt there with the tape slack in my hand, and the flashlight beam trembling across 50 years of other people's benchmarks, and I understood all at once, in a way I could not understand. I was not the first to kneel here. I want to be precise about what happened in me, because it is the hinge of my whole life, and I have gone over it 10,000 times. It was not that the marks were frightening. A rational man is not frightened by scratches on a rock. It was that the marks were a mirror, the clearest mirror I had ever been handed. And in the trembling flashlight beam I saw, suddenly, not scratches but people, a whole line of them, stretching back 50 years, each one kneeling exactly here, in exactly my posture, with exactly my feeling of rigor and discovery, each one certain he was the first to really watch the lake, the first to catch it holding still, the first and the only and the sane one, each one warm with the relief of a system confirmed, and each one by one, contracting down to the still point and walking out weird, or staying too long, or walking toward the water one October morning and not turning back. And I saw myself among them. I saw that the immunity I had felt for 19 years, the pride, those others didn't log. I'll be fine because I write it down was not immunity at all. It was the exact symptom every one of them had felt, the identical delusion in the identical solitude. And that the column of marks was not a mystery. It was a diagnosis. 50 years of the same wounded man making the same small mistake. And the mistake was not the lake. The lake had never done anything. The mistake was us, was me, was the kind of person who comes to the top of the world to be confirmed and finds in the indifferent stillness exactly the confirmation he came for, which is the confirmation of his own disappearance. And into that understanding came the second thing, the older thing, the thing from the valley. This is why the boulder saved me and would not have saved a different man. Because the boulder handed me, in that instant, the exact feeling I had spent my whole life fleeing. The feeling of a man who has been looking at the periphery to avoid the center and has just by accident looked at the center. I had felt that feeling fully with my whole self exactly once before. It was the hour Elaine put her thin hand over mine and stopped me straightening the glass and said, "You can just be here." And I had looked at her face, the actual center, the dying woman in the actual room. And now, kneeling at the boulder in the dark with the flashlight trembling across the marks of the vanished, I looked at the center again, and the center was this. The lake was not holding still because it was a special lake. The lake was holding still because I was not in any real sense looking at the lake. I was looking at the number. I had done to the lake exactly what I had done to Elaine. I had straightened its surface and called it love. I had managed the periphery of a living thing so completely that I had never once in an entire summer actually seen it. And it had been changing the whole time, right in front of me. The way she had been changing, the way she had been dying, right in front of me while I faced the wall. I stood up from the boulder. My legs barely held me, and I did the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than the log entry, harder than the descent, harder than anything. I made myself turn away from the marks and look at the actual water, and the light was just coming now, the gray August dawn. And I looked at the lake, not the gauge, not the number, the lake, and I saw that it was moving. Of course it was moving. There was a breeze coming down off the notch, and the surface was riffled and pushing at the shore, live and gray and indifferent. There were water striders working the shallows, a dipper bobbing on a rock, exactly as there had always been. And the level I could see it now, once I looked at the shore instead of the gauge, the level was down, way down. The whole summer's foot and a half of ordinary recession, sitting right there in the wet, dark rim of bare stone the water had left as it drew back through July and August. The way it draws back every single year, naturally. The way water does, the way everything does. And I had not seen it. For 2 months I had knelt in the dark and measured a lake that was leaving and recorded that it stayed. Because I had stopped reading the gauge in June and started reading my memory of the gauge. And my memory said the same number every day, because that is what my memory is for. That is what I had trained it to be. A machine that says the same thing every day so that nothing ever has to be felt to slip. I walked to the staff gauge, the real one, the painted post, and I made myself read it letter by letter, band by band, as if I had never seen it. And it said what the shore said, a foot and a half down from June. And it had been saying it all along, the numbers right there under the faded paint. And I had walked past that post every single morning for 2 months and written down not what it said, but what I already knew it would say. I stood in the shallows with the cold water around my boots, and I understood the whole of it at last. There was no ghost, no entity, no special lake. The horror had no supernatural anything in it. The horror was only this, that a human being can stand in front of the truth every day and not see it because he already knows what it says, and that this is not a rare affliction of mountain lakes. It is the most ordinary thing a person can do. It is what I did to my wife's whole dying. It is what my father did in his ledger and what I inherited from him in a hardware store before I could shave. It is what everyone does, all the time, substituting the record for the world. The idea of the person for the person, the number for the water. The kettle had not taught me to do it. The kettle had only removed everything that normally interrupts it. Every other person, every disagreement, every skipped stone spreading its rude rings across the surface, until I was alone with the pure, uninterrupted exercise of the thing I had always done, and it had grown, unchecked, to fill my entire mind, and very nearly to consume it the way it had consumed the 9 or 12 before me, the way it would have consumed me if my hand had not slipped in the dark and put the flashlight on the marks. I did not walk out in October. I walked out that day. That same August morning, I banked the fire. I did not leave the stove going. And I opened the log and I wrote the truest sentence of my life, departing post. The lake is dropping normally. It has been dropping all along. I have not been well. And my hand shook so badly that the last words are barely legible. And I looked at my own shaking, honest handwriting, and I did the thing that cost me more than any other thing. I left it shaking. I did not rewrite it neatly, because a neat correction would have been the disease again. It would have been the straightened glass. And I was done straightening. I was so tired. I had been straightening my whole life, and it had cost me the only person I ever loved, and it had nearly cost me myself. And I was done. I packed what I could carry and I left the instruments on the desk, the tape, the level, the little waterproof notebook full of 2 months of identical false readings. And I walked down past the boulder in the gray light, and I had my knife, and I felt the deep bodily reflex of 19 years, the pull to kneel and scratch my mark and make myself permanent. To become the 10th line going up the granite for the next one to find and feel superior to. And I stood there with the knife in my hand, and I did not do it. I put the knife away. I left my mark unmade. Let them find 9 or 12 and not 10. Let there be a gap where I should have been. Let the record for once fail to close. It is the only thing I have ever done that I am proud of, and it is so small. It is a man declining to scratch a rock, and it is the whole of my redemption, if I have any, that once in my life I refused to convert myself into a record and looked at the water instead and walked away. I stopped at the Denner turnout, and there was no smoke from the ruined cabin below it. There never had been. I understood that now. I had smelled smoke in June. Walking in, I had told myself someone was down there. Because a mind beginning to read its record instead of the world furnishes the record with what it expects. An old chimney says fire the way an old gauge says the same number. I had supplied the smoke myself and then walked past and been briefly, correctly confused by the absence of the thing I'd invented, and then filed the confusion and moved on. There was no ghost in the Dennard cabin. There was no ghost anywhere on that mountain. That is the thing I most need you to believe, and the thing hardest to believe, because a ghost would let me off. A ghost would mean the lake did it to me, and the lake did not do it to me. I did it to myself. We all did it to ourselves. 9 or 12 of us across 50 years, each carrying our own wound up the trail, and finding at the top a silence so complete that the wound could finally have us whole, with nothing and no one to interrupt. Now the smell. I promised you the smell, the mineral smell under the pine tar and mouse and coffee in the green metal box, that I said at the very beginning came not from the lake, but from us, from the people who stayed. I know what it was now, and it is the last piece, and it is the worst. When I went to the district office after, I read the 50 years of logs. I read them in a back room over 2 days, and the boxes had that smell faint, the old triplicate paper, and I realized I had been smelling it in the cabin for 19 years without knowing it. The smell of the accumulated logs, 5 decades of careful books. It is not a mystical smell. It is only old paper and ink and the mineral dust of the mountain worked into it. But here is the worst thing. Here is the thing I understood in that back room, with my hand flat on my own shaking last entry. The smell was the smell of the disease itself. It was the smell of 50 years of wounded people converting the world into records instead of living in it. Every one of those books was a monument to a life spent facing the wall. The smell I had lived inside for 19 years was the smell of everyone who had ever come to the kettle to be confirmed and had, book by book, careful entry by careful entry, written themselves out of the world while appearing to record it. And I had breathed it every day and added to it every day. My own careful pages going into the same boxes to give off the same smell to the next one who came. That is what I meant at the very beginning when I said the smell came from us, from the people who stayed. It is the smell of the ledger. It is the smell of my father's store and my color-coded binder and every log I ever kept. It is the smell of not looking, and it had been in my nose my whole life. And I only recognized it at the end, in a back room, weeping over the 1 page in 50 years that broke the pattern, which was mine, which was the one where a man finally wrote down that he had not been well. I live in the valley again. I want to tell you about the after, because the after is where the truth of a thing like this actually lives. And it is not what you would want it to be. It is not recovery. It is not peace. It is something smaller and harder and more honest than either. And I would be lying to you. I would be straightening the glass if I gave you an ending that felt like healing. I have a small apartment on the east side, not far, as it happens, from the elementary school where Elaine taught. I did not choose it for that, or so I told myself. It took me some months to admit that I had chosen it because the cottonwood is there, the one that drops its seed fluff every June, so thick it looks like snow on the playground. Once a year now, I stand at my window and watch the fluff come down, and I let myself remember her, not as an entry, not as my wife, but as Elaine, as the specific woman who came home smelling of pencil shavings and put her thin hand over mine and said, "You can just be here." It is the one deliberate act of remembering I have built into my year, and it is the descendant, I understand, of the private notebook I abandoned in the 12th summer, the book of presents I traded for the book of management. I am trying to keep the book of presents again, in whatever small way I can. Once a year at the window in the fluff, I look at the center. It is not much. It is what I have. I have a job. I file things, of course. There is no escaping what I am. And I have stopped trying to escape it, which is itself a kind of progress. The disease and I have come to an arrangement. I work in the records department of the county, and I am good at it. And there is a version of me that finds this unbearably bleak the man who nearly disappeared into a lake of his own making, now spending his days converting the world into records for a living. But there is another version that understands it differently. That understands the compulsion is not going away, that it is in me the way it was in my father, the way it was installed in a hardware store before I could shave, and that the only question available to a man like me is not whether to keep records, but whether to remember, while keeping them, that the record is not the thing. I keep the records now knowing they are not the world. That is the whole of the difference, and it is everything, and it is nothing. It is a light I have to switch on by hand every single morning against a darkness that wants only to be left alone with itself. Because it does not go away. I need you to understand that, especially if you are the kind of person who might one day be sent alone into a silence. The lie the recovery stories tell is that you have your revelation and you are changed, and the old self is dead. The old self is not dead. I wake before light every morning, still, out of 19 years of habit. And every morning the pull is there. The pull toward the still point. The longing for a world that holds. I feel it standing at my kitchen window, looking at the traffic, my mind wanting to sort it, count it, convert the moving, indifferent living street into a record I can master. And I have to stop myself. I have to make myself just look. Just watch the actual cars driven by actual people, each carrying a wound of their own toward some silence of their own. And it is hard. It is the hardest thing I do, and I do it every day. And I will do it wrong some days. Some mornings I catch myself 20 minutes gone into some pointless act of ordering, some inventory of nothing, and I have to climb back out. And the climbing does not get easier. It only gets more familiar. That is what the after is. It is not a cure. It is a discipline. A daily, deliberate turning toward, and I cannot manufacture it. That is the thing that keeps me up at night, that the moment which saved me came by accident, by a slipped hand in the dark, by grace, if you want to call it that. And I cannot store grace in a system or file it for later use. I can only try to stay the kind of man who might be able to receive it again, if it comes. And I do not know if I am succeeding. And no one is keeping the book that would tell me. I went back to the district office once more a few months ago, and I asked whether they had hired a ranger for the kettle the following summer. And they had. Of course they had. There is always another. And I asked, casually, what the person was like. And the woman at the desk, who did not know me, who did not know any of it, said something that has not left me. She said, "Oh, he's perfect for it. Very meticulous. Keeps everything just so. You never have to worry about his paperwork." And she said it as praise. She said it the way the younger man had said, if anyone can handle it. The way the sorting machine always says it, placing exactly the wrong person into exactly the wrong place and calling the placement a good fit. And I stood at that desk, and I wanted to say something. I wanted to warn her, warn him. The meticulous man who keeps everything just so. But there is nothing I could have said that would have landed, because from the inside, the meticulousness feels like virtue. It felt like virtue to me for 19 years. And you cannot warn a man out of his own virtue. He will only defend it. He will only build the wall a little higher. Those others didn't log. I'll be fine because I write it down. So I said nothing. I said thank you, and I left. But I thought about the boulder, and the gap where my mark should be and is not. And I thought, that is my message to him. That is the only warning I know how to send across the years to a person I will never meet. And it is not words, because words he would defend against. It is an absence. It is a hole in the record. It is the one thing his meticulous mind will not be able to file, and I have to trust it, because it is all I have. I think about him, the meticulous man, up there now this very summer. And I know exactly what he is doing. I know the shape of his days, the loop counterclockwise, the gauge, the boulder. And I know that some morning, if he is unlucky, if he is the kind who cannot be bored, the lake will seem to hold still for him, and he will feel the relief, the warmth in the chest, the deep, dangerous confirmation. And he will get rigorous, and he will kneel at the boulder in the dark with his own tape and his own flashlight, and he will scratch his mark, and he will begin the long, quiet contraction down toward the still point. And there is nothing I can do. I cannot climb the trail and stop him. I cannot warn him. I can only hope, and it is the only prayer I have left, that some morning his hand slips in the dark the way mine slipped, that the flashlight falls on the marks, that he counts them, and finds 9 or 12 and not the number he expects, finds a gap, a place where a mark should be and is not, and that the gap catches in his meticulous mind the way a stone catches in a shoe, that he cannot file it, that he kneels there, troubled by an absence he cannot explain, and that in his trouble for one moment he looks up from the marks and looks at the water, the actual water, and sees that it is moving, that it has been moving all along, that it is leaving the way it always leaves, the way everything leaves, because that is the whole of it in the end. The whole of what I understood too late for Elaine, and just barely in time for myself. The water is always leaving. The lake was always dropping. Everything drains away and nothing holds still, and no measurement ever built has stopped a single thing from slipping. Not one. And the only choice you ever really have is whether to spend your one life straightening the glass on the nightstand or looking, actually looking, at the face beside you while it is still there to be looked at. I chose wrong for a very long time. I chose wrong on the most important night of my life, and she died while I chose wrong, facing the wall. And I do not know, I will never know whether I was looking at her when she went. And that not knowing is my sentence. And I serve it every day. And I have made a kind of peace with serving it, the only kind available, which is to let it stay unresolved, to not file it under some comforting explanation, to leave it shaking on the page, like my last entry in the log. I am not the first ranger to lose my mind up there. That is the title of this thing, if it has one, and it is true. There were 9 or 12 before me, and there will be more after. And I am not special. The immunity I felt was the disease, and the pride was the symptom. And I was exactly like all of them in every way but one. I might be the first to notice I was doing it. I do not know if that saved me. Most mornings I do not think it did. I think I am still losing it slowly, the ordinary way, the way everyone does, one substituted record at a time. And the only difference between me and the others is that now I know, and knowing is not a cure. Knowing is only a light you have to keep switched on by hand, all day, every day, against a darkness that wants only to be left alone with itself. But I looked at the end, at the center, at the moving, indifferent, living water, and I put my knife away, and I did not add my mark, and I came down, and I have not stopped looking since, and it is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I do it again every day, and I will do it tomorrow, and that not the escape. There is no escape. There is only the discipline that is the whole of what I have to give you. There is supposed to be a mark on that boulder, and there is not. If you ever go up there past the Denard turnout where there is no smoke, over the 4th switchback where the stone rocks under your left boot and then goes silent, up to the green metal box that smells of pine tar and mouse and coffee, and underneath of 50 years of careful books, if you ever go, walk down to the boat ramp and find the boulder above the waterline and put your light on it and count the marks, count them carefully, you will find a gap, a place where a mark should be and is not. And when you find it, I am asking you, whoever you are, for God's sake, put your knife away. Do not add yours. Turn around and look at the water, the actual water, the water that is leaving. That is all. That is the whole testimony. The book is complete now, and it is accurate. And for once in my life, it is not a wall.